A furious shout from my father, "Get out and stay out," tore through the dining room. His face was a mask of both rage and deep disappointment. The Thanksgiving turkey sat untouched between us, its presence a stark contrast to the venomous words that bounced off the walls of our San Diego home. My fork, caught in midair on its way to my mouth, remained suspended as I absorbed the shock. The cranberry sauce on my plate suddenly tasted bitter, and I felt the familiar, suffocating weight of his expectations pressing down on me. "My name is Chloe Reed. I am 28 years old, and I had just destroyed my father's meticulously crafted vision for our family's legacy. For as long as I could remember, Arthur Reed had meticulously planned every detail of my life around a single, overarching goal: to have me join the renowned law firm, Reed and Associates, which bore our family's name. My brother, Liam, had followed this path without deviation. He had graduated from Harvard Law and seamlessly transitioned into his role as a junior partner. I, however, had always been different. I questioned everything and was always drawn to something far more meaningful than billable hours and corporate legal battles. The moment I informed my father that I had officially withdrawn from law school, I watched the 28 years he had invested in me disintegrate before my eyes. He had dedicated decades to building Reed and Associates into one of San Diego's most respected family law practices, and he saw my decision as a complete betrayal of his efforts. My mother, Eleanor, sat frozen beside him, her wine glass trembling slightly in her perfectly manicured hands. Over the years, she had mastered the art of silent consent, never once challenging my father's plans for our family's future. "You are a disgrace to everything this family has built," Arthur continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. This hushed tone felt even more menacing than his earlier outburst. "I have sacrificed everything to give you opportunities, and this is how you repay me." I carefully placed my fork on the table, a cold and resolute feeling settling in my chest. While his disappointment was a familiar emotion, the sense of finality in his voice was new. Liam shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze fixed on his plate as if the mashed potatoes held the secrets of the universe. Even at the age of 34, he couldn't bring himself to stand up for me against our father's fury. "After everything I have done for you," Arthur repeated, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor as he stood abruptly. "Get out of my house. Get out and stay out." The only sound was my mother's sharp intake of breath as I slowly rose, tucking my napkin neatly beside my plate. The ritual of our family dinner had always felt like a performance, and tonight the final curtain had fallen. As I walked toward the door, I could feel their eyes on my back, but no one made a sound to stop me. The silence was more powerful than any words could have been. Growing up as a Reed meant constantly living under the weight of expectations and appearances. My father had built his reputation on the very concepts of family values and legacy, even as he distanced himself emotionally from his own children. Liam had always been the golden child, the one who asked the right questions and made all the correct choices. He had graduated magna cum laude from Harvard, passed the bar on his first try, and stepped into the family business without ever questioning if it was what he truly wanted. I, on the other hand, had always been the difficult daughter. While Liam immersed himself in corporate law and taxation, I found myself drawn to environmental science and social entrepreneurship. During my undergraduate years at UC San Diego, my summers were spent volunteering for sustainable development organizations instead of interning at prestigious legal firms. My father tolerated these interests as long as I maintained high grades and stayed on my path toward law school. The tension between us had been building for years, but it reached a breaking point during my second year at Stanford Law. I was sitting in a contracts class, listening to a professor drone on about breach remedies, when a profound sense of despair washed over me. Every single case study felt like another nail in the coffin of my true self. That very evening, I called my roommate from 3 years prior, Talia, who now worked with a female-led venture capital group in Los Angeles. "I have an idea," I told her, as I paced around my small apartment. Solar-powered infrastructure kits for developing communities. Plug-and-play systems that can provide clean energy and internet connectivity to remote areas. Talia listened intently as I laid out my vision. The technology was already available, but no one had figured out how to make it accessible and affordable for the communities that needed it most. I had been researching the concept for months, sketching out business models on napkins, and spending my nights reading about microfinance and social impact investing. You should pitch this to Vidian Capital, Talia suggested. They are looking for exactly this kind of innovation. That conversation changed everything for me. Within 1 week, I had quietly withdrawn from Stanford and moved into a cramped co-working space in Venice Beach. My parents were under the impression I was taking a temporary leave of absence to find myself, and I allowed them to believe it. Liam would call to check in, but our conversations were always strained and overly careful, as if we were both afraid of saying the wrong thing. For 9 months, I lived off my savings and ate ramen noodles while perfecting my business pitch. I submitted proposals to 17 different investment groups and received 17 rejections. Some were form letters, while others provided more detailed feedback about market viability and scalability concerns. Each rejection was painful, but it also taught me something invaluable about resilience and determination. My parents never asked for specifics about my break from law school, and I never offered any information. The less they knew, the better. I was developing something truly revolutionary, a system designed to genuinely transform lives, yet I knew my family would never comprehend it. The pivotal moment arrived on a rain-drenched Tuesday in March, precisely 9 months after I had started this intense journey. I was seated in a cramped co-working space in Venice Beach, surrounded by a mess of empty coffee cups and crumpled papers, when my phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but an instinct told me to answer. Chloe Reed, this is Sarah Kim from Vidian Capital. We'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss your Sun Nest Systems proposal, the voice on the other end said. My hands began to tremble as I processed her words. Vidian Capital was recognized as one of the most reputable social impact investment firms on the West Coast, founded and managed by women who had made fortunes in technology and were now committed to funding enterprises that could bring about positive change. I had submitted my proposal to them 4 months earlier and had completely given up on it, assuming it had been lost in the overwhelming number of applications. The meeting was arranged for the following week at their sleek downtown Los Angeles office. I wore the only professional suit I owned and carried a weathered leather portfolio that had once belonged to my grandfather. The conference room offered a sweeping view of the city skyline, and I tried not to let the intimidating surroundings rattle my nerves as I prepared my presentation. Sarah introduced me to the other partners, Dr. Ava O'Reilly, a Nigerian-born engineer celebrated for her groundbreaking work in water purification, and Monica Hayes, a former Goldman Sachs executive who had left Wall Street to focus on sustainable investing. These were women who had shattered barriers and forged their own unique paths, and I felt a surge of hope that they might truly grasp my vision. I began to present my solar infrastructure concept with passionate conviction, explaining how these modular energy systems could be deployed in rural communities across Africa and South America. The technology was about far more than just providing electricity. It was about creating connectivity, enabling education, and empowering local economies. Each kit would contain solar panels, battery storage, LED lighting, and satellite internet capability, all packaged within a durable, weatherproof unit that local technicians could assemble. Our market research indicates a massive demand, I explained, advancing through slides that showcase the global scale of energy poverty. 2 billion people still lack access to dependable electricity, and conventional grid infrastructure is just too expensive for remote communities. Dr. O'Reilly leaned forward, clearly intrigued. What is your scalability model? How do you intend to manufacture and distribute these systems affordably? She asked. I had foreseen this very question and had dedicated several weeks to forming partnerships with manufacturers in Southeast Asia who specialized in renewable energy components. The key is creating standardized modules that can be produced efficiently while upholding quality standards, I answered. We partner with established manufacturers and focus on the final assembly and deployment. Our core value isn't in reinventing solar technology, but in making it accessible and sustainable for the communities that need it most. The meeting lasted for 2 hours, and by the end, I could see genuine excitement in their expressions. Sarah escorted me to the elevator, and her final words filled me with optimism. We'll be in touch very soon. This is precisely the kind of innovation we've been searching for. That evening, I called Talia to share the news, but I kept it from my family. They still believed I was on a temporary hiatus from law school. The call from Vidian Capital came 3 weeks later, and it changed everything. Sarah's voice was warm yet professional as she delivered the life-altering news. Chloe, we would like to offer Sun Nest Systems $30 million in Series A funding with an additional pledge for Series B if you achieve your first-year deployment targets. I nearly dropped the phone. $30 million. It was an amount I couldn't have imagined, enough to launch operations across 3 continents and secure the manufacturing partnerships needed to scale up quickly. The terms were also incredibly favorable. Vidian would take a 40% stake in the company, leaving me with a controlling interest and the freedom to pursue my vision. There is one condition, Sarah continued. We want you to accept a position on the California Renewable Council. It's a state advisory board that evaluates green energy initiatives and distributes federal grants. Your expertise would be invaluable, and it would give Sun Nest additional credibility in the market. The California Renewable Council was a prestigious group composed of leading experts in sustainable technology and environmental policy. Membership was by invitation only, typically reserved for executives with decades of experience. At 28, I would become one of the youngest appointees in the council's history. I am so honored, I replied, still trying to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. When would I start? Immediately. We're announcing the funding next month, and the council appointment will be part of the press release. This is going to put you on the map in a huge way, Chloe. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence in my tiny Venice Beach apartment. Just 9 months earlier, I had been a law school dropout, living on instant noodles and questioning every single decision I had made. Now, I was on the verge of becoming the chief strategy officer of a $30 million company with operations spanning multiple continents. The following few weeks were a blur of legal documents, media interviews, and strategic planning sessions. Vidian's team helped me establish a proper corporate structure, hire key personnel, and start the process of setting up manufacturing partnerships. I moved out of my cramped apartment and into a modern loft in Santa Monica, finally able to afford furniture that didn't come from a thrift store. The press coverage was immense. TechCrunch featured Sun Nest Systems as one of the top social impact startups to watch, and Forbes included me in their 30 Under 30 list for social entrepreneurship. The attention was gratifying, but it also felt completely surreal. I kept anticipating that someone would tap me on the shoulder and tell me it had all been a mistake. Throughout it all, my family remained completely unaware of my success. I had mastered the art of evading their questions about my future, offering vague answers about exploring opportunities and taking time to figure things out. My father had ceased asking altogether after our last difficult phone conversation, when he had once again suggested I think about going back to law school before it was too late. Occasional phone calls with Liam became increasingly strained. He was consumed by a high-profile divorce case that was bringing a lot of positive media attention to his firm, Reed & Associates. I could sense his frustration with my own lack of professional direction. In his view, I was squandering my potential while he was building his career and strengthening the family's legacy. "Dad is really worried about you," he commented during one of our infrequent conversations. "He thinks you're having some kind of quarter-life crisis." I found the irony almost comical. My father was concerned about my supposed personal crisis, yet I was quietly building a business that was designed to outlast his law firm by multiple decades. Still, I chose to keep this information to myself, knowing the eventual reveal would be far more satisfying as a complete surprise. In October, the California Renewable Council officially announced my new position, which led to another wave of media attention. Several legal publications, including the California Bar Journal, mentioned my appointment. However, I didn't believe my family paid any attention to environmental news. The divide between my public success and their private perception of my failure was getting bigger every day. As Thanksgiving drew near, the tension between my two separate worlds became almost unbearable. In the business world, I was being recognized as an innovator in sustainable technology. Our company, Sunis Systems, had launched its first 2 pilot programs in Kenya and Guatemala, providing clean energy to more than 5,000 people in remote communities. The success stories poured in. Children were now studying by LED light instead of using dangerous kerosene lamps. Small businesses were able to operate refrigeration units for the first time, and community centers were offering internet access for education and communication. But to my family, I was still the disappointing daughter who had abandoned a legal career for some ill-defined pursuits. The emotional toll of this disconnect was painful, especially when I received updates about the continued growth of Reed and Associates. My father had recently been honored by the San Diego Bar Association for his work in family law, and Liam was being considered for an early partnership. I was caught between a powerful desire to share my accomplishments and the tactical advantage of maintaining my secret. A part of me longed to prove to my father that my decision to drop out of law school had led to something far more meaningful than a partnership in his firm. But another part of me understood that the element of surprise would have a greater impact than a gradual revelation. A week before Thanksgiving, I made a life-altering decision. I purchased a $7 million oceanfront mansion in Malibu. The house featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean and had private access to the beach. The home was not just a symbol of my success, but a definitive statement of my independence. I was no longer the lost daughter living on borrowed time and good intentions. The real estate transaction generated its own media buzz as celebrity news outlets speculated about the young tech executive who had acquired one of Malibu's most exclusive properties. The attention made me nervous, but I assumed my family was too preoccupied with their own lives to notice entertainment news about property purchases. I spent the days leading up to Thanksgiving meticulously preparing for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. My family expected me to announce my return to law school, or at the very least, admit that my experimental phase had failed. Instead, I planned to tell them the complete truth about my withdrawal and let them form their own conclusions about my current situation. On the morning of Thanksgiving, I drove from my new Malibu home to my parents' house in La Jolla, taking the scenic coastal route that had always been a source of comfort. The familiar neighborhoods looked different to me now that I was viewing them from a position of financial success rather than dependence. I parked in front of the house where I had grown up, noting how modest it appeared compared to my new estate. My mother greeted me at the door with her usual blend of affection and concern. "Chloe, you look wonderful. How are you feeling about everything?" Everything was her diplomatic way of referring to my extended absence from law school without directly mentioning the growing tension. I hugged her and followed her into the kitchen, where the familiar sights and smells of Thanksgiving preparation transported me back to childhood gatherings that had felt much warmer and more genuine. Liam arrived with his girlfriend, Zoe, a fellow attorney who worked at a competing firm. They were the perfect legal power couple, discussing recent cases and bar association politics with the easy confidence of people who had never once questioned their career paths. Zoe had always been polite to me, but I could sense her confusion about my status as the family disappointment. As we gathered around the dining room table, I knew this would be the final Thanksgiving where my family saw me as a failure. The conversation I had been dreading began innocently, as family conversations often do. We had finished the main course, and my mother was clearing plates while my father poured wine with the same ceremonial precision he applied to everything. Liam and Zoe were discussing a recent Supreme Court decision that could impact family law practices, and I found myself genuinely interested in their analysis despite my own very different path. "Chloe," my father said abruptly, his attention shifting to me with the focused intensity that had always intimidated me. "I have been patient about this entire sabbatical situation, but we really need to discuss your plans. The spring semester starts in 2 months, and if you are going to re-enroll at Stanford, we need to handle the paperwork soon." The assumption in his voice was clear. Of course, I would be returning to law school. What other reasonable choice could there possibly be? My mother nodded encouragingly from the kitchen doorway, clearly hoping this conversation would finally resolve the uncertainty that had been hanging over our family gatherings. "Actually, Dad," I said, carefully setting down my wine glass, "I'm not on a sabbatical. I officially withdrew from Stanford 8 months ago." The silence that followed was absolute. Zoe stopped her conversation with Liam mid-sentence, and I could see my mother's face turn pale as she processed what I had just revealed. A look of confusion on my father's face gave way to a swift anger that almost made me recoil. "You did what?" he said, his voice dangerously low. I calmly repeated myself, looking him directly in the eye. I had left law school. It was not the right path for me, and I had decided to pursue a different direction. Liam, my brother, leaned forward, clearly hoping to de-escalate the rising tension. Chloe, perhaps we could talk about other choices for reapplying next year, he suggested. There are other excellent law schools that might be a better fit. You do not understand, I said, cutting him off. I am never going back to law school. I started a business, and it has been incredibly successful. The vein on my father's temple, which always appeared when he was furious, pulsed as his face flushed red. A company, he scoffed. What kind of company? Some insignificant internet startup that will be broke in 6 months. Sun Nest Systems, I stated plainly. We create solar-powered infrastructure for communities in developing nations. We just secured $30 million in series of funding. The words hung in the air like the lingering smoke after an explosion. I watched the faces of my family as they tried to comprehend what I had just said. $30 million was an amount that surpassed the total revenue Reed and Associates had generated over its entire 30-year existence. That is impossible, my father said, his voice flat. You have been out of school for 8 months. No one raises that kind of money without credentials or experience. I have both, I answered with composure. I explained that for 2 years, I had been developing the technology and business model while supposedly studying things like contracts and torts. And as of last month, I was appointed to the California Renewable Council. Zoe's eyes widened with recognition. The Renewable Council? That is an immensely respected position. My firm has been trying to get clients appointed to that board for years. My father stood up abruptly, the loud scrape of his chair on the floor causing everyone to start. You are fabricating this, he said, his voice a mixture of rage and disbelief. This is some grand fantasy you have made up to justify giving up your education. I am not making it up, I said, staying seated as he loomed over me. But it is clear you would rather believe I am delusional than accept that I have succeeded without following the path you created for me. It was at that moment that he lashed out with the words that would irrevocably end our relationship. The next morning, the 20-minute drive along the Pacific Coast Highway to my new Malibu mansion gave me time to process what had happened and plan what I would do next. My father's words, "Get out and stay out," still echoed in my ears. It had been his final statement before I walked out of their dining room, knowing it was for the last time. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since I left La Jolla, with missed calls from Liam and numerous text messages from my mother pleading for me to call them back, but I ignored all of them. The time for explanations and forgiveness had passed the second my father chose to believe his own assumptions rather than listen to the truth about my success. The moving truck arrived that afternoon, carrying the minimal possessions I had managed to gather during my years of building Sun Nest Systems. Everything fit easily into just 2 rooms of my sprawling new home, a stark reminder of how dramatically my life had changed. As I unpacked my laptop and the framed photograph of my very first solar installation in Kenya, I felt a powerful and surprising mix of sadness and liberation. Later that day, I called Sarah at Vidian Capital to talk about the timeline for our expansion into Central America. The conversation was energizing, focused on the concrete plans for bringing our technology to communities that desperately needed reliable energy. As we spoke about government approvals and manufacturing partners, I realized just how much more fulfilling this work was than any career in law could ever have been. By the way, Sarah mentioned near the end of our call, we are getting some interesting inquiries about potential partnerships. Several law firms are reaching out about pro bono opportunities to support our community development work. Really? I said, suddenly intrigued. What kind of firms? Mostly environmental law specialists, but a couple of family practices as well. Apparently, there is significant interest in the corporate social responsibility aspect. I made a mental note to review those partnership proposals carefully. The irony of law firms wanting to be associated with my success was not lost on me, especially after my father had so completely dismissed my accomplishments just hours earlier. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, I was reviewing grant applications in my home office when my assistant called with a pressing update. "Chloe," she said, "I thought you should know that Reed and Associates submitted an application for the state renewable energy grant program. They are requesting $2 million for a sustainability initiative." I nearly laughed out loud. Reed and Associates had never shown any interest in environmental matters throughout my entire life. The fact that they were suddenly seeking green energy grants seemed like a clear attempt to capitalize on the growing market for sustainable legal services. "What is the nature of their application?" I asked, pulling up the California Renewable Council database on my computer. "They are proposing to establish a pro bono legal clinic dedicated to environmental justice issues. The grant would fund 3 years of operations, including staff salaries and community outreach programs. As a council member, I had the ability to review all grant applications before they were evaluated by the full committee. I opened the submission from Reed & Associates and read through it carefully, noting the ambitious goals and impressive-sounding initiatives. The proposal was professionally presented and well-written, precisely what I would have expected from my father's firm. However, there was one critical issue that the other council members would not immediately recognize. Reed & Associates had no experience in environmental law, no current relationships with environmental justice organizations, and no history of supporting sustainable initiatives. The application was essentially a request for $2 million to enter a field they had never shown interest in pursuing. More importantly, there was a clear conflict of interest that would automatically disqualify their application. I scrolled to the bottom of the council database entry and found the field I was looking for: potential conflicts. I typed carefully, knowing that my words would determine the fate of my father's grant application. Sunnest Systems Executive Relationship, I wrote, adding my name and title for clarity. The rejection would be both swift and public, visible to everyone in San Diego's legal community. As I submitted the conflict notice that would deny my father's grant application, I realized that revenge had found me rather than the other way around. The path I had chosen for authentic reasons had led to a moment of perfect justice that no amount of planning could have orchestrated better. Sometimes the best revenge is living successfully according to your own values and allowing the consequences to reveal themselves naturally.